Can everyone hear me? Do I need to use this thing? Can you hear me?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. It's really good to be here, and actually the invitation to being here at the Men's Connect Breakfast, it's actually, there's a bit of my story that I'll get to that's related to men's ministry here at First Press. So Steve asked me, to just share my story. I thought about the word discernment. I mean, we're all constantly hearing that word or using that word, figuring out life, right? Whether we're just coming out of school, discerning what career to move toward and, as a young adult. And like probably many of you already know, right? It continues for a lifetime. Steve mentioned that I retired, but even that word, and one of the reflection questions touches on that word and what it might mean to you now, what God may be teaching you about what that word means, what he thinks of that word versus how we define it here, in our human lives. So I'm just going to walk you through my story, my discernment over the years. Now, it's going to just touch upon, there's so many small things and details and events or experiences or relationships that have kind of shaped my journey so far. But I'm just going to be touching upon some kind of higher level, larger highlights of that to give you an idea. And one of the images that I'm going to use is, and everyone probably has their own image that they might consider when they think about discernment. I've always pictured this open door that's just cracked open. And God has seemed to have placed these open, partly open doors for me to kind of enough to look into. A lot of times wanting to shut it and walk away, repeatedly. And then finally, walking through some of those doors. So you'll see that theme of the open door. That might work for you, or maybe you have something else that works. A lot of people use windows or just openings that where God's tapping you on the shoulder. That's an image that resonates with me. So this is just a quick introduction. Steve, there's a photo of my family. Some of you have probably even seen our dog here at church on Sundays, Max. So discerning God's call. I know years ago and growing up, whenever I would hear that phrase, it sounds like such a church, Yeah, I think Charlene even mentioned that, how we like to use certain words in church. Discerning God's call, it always, these are just the themes that I'm going to be going through. It's always been traditionally, at least for me, the way people have used it, right, associated with someone going into full-time vocational ministry. Other than that, discerning God's call really wasn't in my vocabulary as a young adult. But over time, through experiences, going back to seminary, I've been using this definition for myself. It's that God's call is an invitation to specific purpose, mission, and relationship with the Father, Son, and Spirit. So you can see in this definition, purpose, mission, and relationship, it really doesn't have anything to do specifically only with vocational, full-time Christian ministry. This definition could apply to, it applies to every single person, no matter what they're doing, whatever stage in life, from high schoolers that are trying to figure out what they're going to do next, to those of us that are retired and have this time ahead of us. These three words, apply to all of us. in our lives here on earth. Ephesians 4:1, therefore I, a prisoner for serving the Lord, beg you to lead a life worthy of your calling. For you have been called by God. Always be humble and gentle, be patient with each other. Make every effort to keep yourselves united in spirit, binding yourselves together with peace. Not just applicable to full-time vocational ministry. In John, God says, I chose you. I appointed you to go and produce lasting fruit. This is my command. Love each other. Again, it can apply to full-time vocational ministry, but it applies to every person's life. In the most important commandment, listen, O Israel, you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, and all your strength. That's the relationship. Love your neighbor as yourself. And this is just another passage that also speaks to the different gifts that God gives to different people. But we're all part of the Christ body. Some of us are apostles, prophets, teachers. So the question is, are we all apostles? Are we all prophets? Are we all teachers, etc.? Of course not. So you should earnestly desire the most helpful gifts. So that's part of the discernment process for me. It's like, well, what are those gifts for me in particular? And I'm sure that, for each of you, thinking about what are those gifts that God is either have given you and you've developed, or that he wants to develop in you, no matter what age you are, to be constantly being aware of the gifts that he would like to see you develop. And I have to say, it's not always a smooth process. Sometimes you fight against it. I fought against it a lot. So here's the open door. And for me, some of the basic things over the years that I've learned and continue to learn, prayer is so significant. And not just speaking to God, but it's the other part, listening. And that's part of seeing these open doors in your life, or interactions you have with relationships in your life, or life experiences that you experience. So worship, Bible study, and group study of the scriptures. We learn so much in scripture, and a lot of it can be used for our own personal discernment of where God is calling us to be. Life experiences. This is a huge one, at least for me. Trying to take away from experiences that God, brings us to or takes us through. Good, bad, hard, challenging. With our families, faith community here at church, Men's Connect breakfast. Work is a big one for a lot of us. And our leisure time and everything else. Every life experience God is communicating to us. It's just whether we're actually listening in those moments. And then relationships. A huge part. And I think all of you are aware, that's why you're here. The relationships that you're having in this case with men in our community of faith, which is huge. And it actually played a big part in my life, and actually has been a big challenge for myself. Beginnings, Oakland, California. High school pictures, there's a picture there of our church in Chinatown, where I grew up, school pictures. there was those years were very very important, and I think I'm getting more and more thinking back on those experiences than what I realized was happening at the time. And maybe that's similar for a lot of us when we look back at experiences even years and decades prior. I can remember there's certain relationships that I had that I continue to maintain, like from high school. There's only a handful, but those are like really key and formative for me. And I've tried to continue to maintain those, where people would reflect back to me, for example, where I got to learn more about who I was by their feedback with me, or what our relationship was like, or comments that they would make.
Rick, was the large group picture there, is that your church?
No, this is my high school class.
That's your high school.
Wow. That's Skyline.
This was the Skyline in Oakland. Yeah, a classmate somehow dug these up, because he said that they were selling them at the end of our senior year, and I don't know if we didn't have extra money to buy those, but someone was able to purchase them, and then he actually scanned them and sent them out to all of us.
Wow.
And I remember, so we would spend a couple months online. Did you find me? Did you find me? Or can you help me find me? This is the group there. That's the church in Oakland Chinatown on 8th Street. And the other one is my kindergarten class. This teacher right here was a huge influence on me. My first public school teacher. I ended up inviting her to my Cal graduation, and she came. So that was important. Yeah, Paul.
Just out of curiosity, what year did you graduate from Skyline?
80.
You're trying to see if you graduated with Tom Hanks, but no. I was 74.
These are my 3 brothers on top of my dad. My late father.
That's you in high school, isn't it?
Yeah.
At Skyline, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it looks like Skyline.
Okay, so this is the first open door. One of the ones that was significant for me. You know, we got involved in scouting really early, my brothers and I. And my dad was a volunteer, my mom and Cub Scouts volunteered. And a lot of our friends from school joined scouting. So we were involved, for years we're involved in it, and it's really where I got my introduction to, we did a lot of camping and things like that with the scout group. So that was like my first introduction to the environment outside. And there was something about it that really piqued my curiosity, wanting to learn. So that's kind of where that started. And then my family even, and it's kind of interesting. So, East Oakland, Chinese family, I don't think your typical let's go out and camp type of family. But my parents were just interested, talking with them later, they were just interested in exposing us to different things. So they had to kind of learn how to camp and stuff like that as part of the process. But I remember we went to several national parks when I was a kid. And it was another huge exposure to the outdoor world, right? There's a lot of education that can happen in parks. At the time, I probably didn't realize it, but I look back, when I think of pictures like this, it reminds me that I'm part of something that's way bigger than myself. I think we talked a little bit about that in that series that Charlene and the pastoral staff did on awe, So I think that's, if I can remember, that's, this is like when I was 8, 9 years old. And I remembered on these trips, I'd meet people wearing this hat, these very hats. They really, I don't know what it was, if it was the hat or it was just that it represented people who worked in relation, to the natural world. I remember taking pictures with these people. I don't think my brothers, it's like, when you take kids to Disneyland and they want to take a picture with Mickey Mouse, this was mine. So I'd look for the ranger and, hey, can I take a picture with you? So there was something about it, and that these people were vocationally caring, protecting the natural world so people like us can enjoy it. So that was another big open door, going on these trips with my family, these experiences. So move on quickly to high school, and I was one of those kids in high school that knew exactly what he wanted to do. I remember when our two girls were growing up, it's like, most kids in high school are thinking, I have no idea, you go in undeclared. I found the 2 forestry schools in California. I applied to them both.
I hope you went to Humboldt.
What's that?
I hope you went to Humboldt.
I applied to both. So I ended up at Cal. But I have a lot of friends in Humboldt, which is... So I ended up going to forestry school as a freshman. I declared my major right away. It was strange. And did 4 years at Cal, have amazing, all these classmates right here. This is how large my forestry class was. Just, what is it, like 30 of us? And we still, I don't know, every 2 or 3 years we get together now. I mean, they're lifelong friends and relationships. We learned a lot. It was just a great experience. So it's just my love for understanding how the natural world works, and then how we as human beings interact with it for our own benefit in some cases. Because, we did a lot of coursework on timber harvesting, and I know it's not an activity that it's not looked positively as by many or some. But it's basically, it's like agriculture, except on a large scale. You're dealing with large plants. Anyway, so 4 years at Cal, it was amazing. And it was just another, stepping through those open doors. And then during college, I was really drawn to, there are so many aspects of forestry that you could get involved in, right? Private land ownership or private companies. I automatically was drawn to public service forestry, so government agencies, because it was working with communities. And so when I got out of school, there was an opportunity to join what's now called CAL FIRE. It was California Department of Forestry back then. And I was there for 7 years. And as you know, CAL FIRE, where you hear about it in the summer, it's half of the work that whole department does is fire related in the summer. So our whole time was in the summer. Everyone was focused on fire. After, the rest of the year, I was focused on forest pest management, an interesting little niche in the whole forest management issue, and dealing with insects and disease in forests and its negative impacts or some positive impacts of that, and helping landowners manage those infestations. So I was there for 7 years, and then I came to a crossroads, another open door. There's the crossroads. So, Kathy and I had been dating the whole time. But then I proposed. and then realized that there was going to be a huge decision that had to be made. This was one of the larger ones in my life. There's a lot, all the forestry work was done in more remote parts of California. And Kathy and I were both originally from here. And after I proposed, she said that, well, I'd really like to stay in the Bay Area, Oakland area, East Bay. I said, wow, we need to talk about this. My whole trajectory was either Northern California or Washington, Oregon. But she really wanted to stay closer to family. And we had that long conversation. I mean, we were going to get married. But that was, I was moving from here to thinking about am I going to end up having to change my career completely? We got married here in this sanctuary. So we made the decision that we settle down here in the Bay Area, and I'd have to start looking for a job. Another open door happened. 1989. I got connected with the East Bay Municipal Utility District, a public water agency here in the East Bay. If you live here in the East Bay, a lot of you get, the water from East Bay MUD. I had no clue that they actually, or how much land that they oversaw or managed. So East Bay MUD's system was over here. This is the Bay Area down here. All our water comes from here, from the Cullinan River and the Sierra foothills. And I found out that the water district had a whole natural resources department. So I started exploring. I said, what's this about? Well, I ended up getting a job at East Bay MUD in 1989. And I ended up getting involved with fisheries work, which is related, right, in terms of the natural resource management. There's a picture of a younger me with a lot of black hair. But the water district owned land, open space lands here in the Bay Area, which some of you may be familiar with around the reservoirs. But most of the land that they own is in the Sierra foothills surrounding the reservoirs up there where the water's collected, the snow melt, then it's piped all the way down across the valley to the Bay Area, which eventually ends up in your faucets. So it was amazing. So as I continued to work, I started there as a ranger in the field, and then gradually over time I continued to work there and got involved in a lot of interesting work. I think at that time I went back to school for public administration because I was really still interested in public service. So I did that while I was at East Bay MUD and ended up being there, 31 years. And even specifically forestry work, I got involved in it. We had to interface with a lot of private timber companies in the Sierra, because especially the ones that had lands that drained into our reservoirs. So oftentimes, I'd be the water quality representative of CAL FIRE, so I was still interacting with this agency, but from a different agency. They would do pre-harvest inspections where we were inspecting their harvest plans, and the water district person was focused on the protections they were doing related to water quality. So it was kind of amazing. So I remember being out there thinking, I would have never thought, I thought I'd have to change my career completely. But I was doing this work, continuing to work. I'd had to do a lot of driving. That's the only thing. living in the Bay Area, but then having to drive up and down to the Sierras for a day or two to do work. But it was amazing, reviewing timber harvest plans and talking with foresters about what they plan to do or what I think they should be adding to their plan to protect water quality for the Bay Area. So it was quite amazing the way God weaved this in. He still used my education throughout the rest of my career at EBMUD. Before I retired, while I was still working at EBMUD, I was looking for a local volunteer work to do. And I was introduced to a place called the George Mark Children's House. It's in San Leandro. It's a pediatric palliative end-of-life care facility for children. And I was just looking for a volunteer opportunity that was close to home. And then the challenge on this one was, but pediatric end of life? What is this? But there was something that was drawing me to it, and I kind of hesitated for a long time. But God kept that door cracked open in front of me. And so I signed up and got trained. And it really introduced me to working with children and families that were in very difficult situations. So it's basically a facility that cares for children, what they call life-limiting conditions. So I guess the definition at that time for life-limiting was that they were not likely to reach adulthood. So they might live for a while, but they're not expected to reach adulthood. And then, of course, there were, end-of-life care also, depending on the condition. So I started volunteering there. This young lady here, I don't remember how old she was then, like 9 maybe. 2004, I got to meet her and her family volunteering. And this is just one of many families that I connected with. This is just earlier this year, a few months ago. This is her. She's still thriving. She doesn't go to that house anymore because she's aged out, I guess. But she, when she was 9 and we used to do homework or play and stuff like that, she was said, I'm going to be an attorney. We just kind of laughed, and her personality said, I can see you as an attorney. And we would laugh about it and stuff like that. Well, I think 2020 or 2019, she went to UCLA and got her degree there, sociology, I think, or something. It was amazing. And she invited us to her graduation party. All these years later, she still remembered me and invited me to her graduation. And then in 2025, she went back to UCLA because she got into law school, and she graduated in 2025. Law school. She's probably done taking her boards now. She was supposed to take her boards the first part of this year, and and again, she invited us to her celebration, and it was just a reminder. This is just one example of ways that God can use you. I mean, she didn't invite very many people from back when she was a little kid. But there was something, the relationship that we had. She always kept in touch, and remembering conversations that we had, at the children's house. She felt really supported and encouraged, and I'm just beginning to learn how God might be using me in people's lives, her parents, etc. So I started volunteering there in 2006, and this is the place. Well, here's another small one, but it's important to me. Larry knows. I'm an English football fan. I didn't have a team really to support, but I thought, I probably should. I grew up in Oakland. A's, well, they're gone. Raiders, they're gone. Warriors, They're over there on the other side of the bay. Those are the teams I grew up with, right? And it was easy to have a team here. How am I going to pick an English football team? And I wanted one that meant something to me. This team is Aston Villa. It's in the English Premier League. When I was volunteering at George Mark Children's House here in San Leandro, I asked them about the history of their facility. They said they were modeled after pediatric hospices in the UK. Oh, interesting. And they told me about one called Acorns Children's Hospice. So the one here in the United States, and actually was the first one in the United States, this one in San Leandro. There are several now, but it was modeled after this organization called Acorns. So I'm looking for a team to support kind of separately, right, in my sports life. See that jersey in the middle? That, when I was looking, that was the year that that team decided to have this, to take off any commercial, United Airlines or Ford or whatever sponsorship on their shirt. And they were going to put this organization, Acorns, on their shirt. And I said, well, wait a minute. Acorns? Sure enough, it's the hospice. And I right then and there, I just said, well, that team chose me. Now I've been supporting them ever since 2006. And this young man I met through my fandom, because he's a fan who lives over in England. But he has muscular dystrophy, and we connected and became friends. And, I just earlier this year, I spent time with him when we were over there. But every year, all the supporter groups here for Aston Villa, I kind of spearheaded fundraising for Acorns. So we raise money every year, and we've, so far we've raised about close to $121,000 for this nonprofit in the UK. But there's this passion about caring for families, specifically, and children that are in these situations. So another opening, connections, even sports related, it somehow reaffirmed my passion for that. So while at George Mark Children's House and caring for families, this is the door that kept opening, and I would close it, opening, and I would close it. I sensed that he wanted me to go back to school. Okay, now think about it. I think at this time, our oldest daughter was about to go to college. I was, 20 years into my career already. There's no way. I just kept closing this door over and over and over because it didn't make any sense to me. We were trying to figure out financially how to send our kids to college. And God just kept opening this door. He wouldn't let me forget it. And finally, he told me, I still remember this clearly, just apply. I'm not asking you to do anything else. It's okay. So I applied. And then while I was working full-time still at EBMUD, I started the Fuller program that was based in the East Bay. They had a remote campus in Menlo Park. And then for the next 8 years, this is a 2-year program, 8 years, I was going to classes 1 quarter at a time. And God just continued to transform me. It was quite a spiritual journey, seminary. Wasn't the academic part, it was there, but it was very much a personal, transformative journey, learning about myself and stuff. And eventually, 8 years later, I graduated. And then the time, and again, the whole nurturing, chaplaincy became a word that was important to me, and learning more about it. I graduated in 2018, and then I realized that my career at EBMUD, that I was actually eligible to retire in 2019. And right then, I started feeling like I was in rhythm with what God was trying to do. Because it's like, well, how could the timing have been like that? It was planned that way. It seems like that there was more work that he wanted me to do once I retired from EBMUD. Out of school, I did my first clinical pastoral education, or CPE unit, at Kaiser San Leandro. Maybe other people who have gone to seminary may have heard this too, or had the same experience. Some people tell me they do it and they know clearly it's not something they want to do again. And then there's others where it just clicks. There's usually not an in-between when it comes to clinical pastoral education. Well, this for me, it really clicked. It really clicked. It was that, it's hard to describe, but when you know that you're where you're supposed to be, even if the situation's really difficult, but you know that this is where God wants you to be, that's what the CPE unit was like. And I still remember there was one experience where I started a shift, and you have your routine, visiting certain patients on the list, but then you get that call first thing when you get to the office and it says, "We need you down in labor and delivery for a fetal demise." That was the term. Thinking, fetal demise? And then, of course, the next 24 hours, that's all I was focused on. The whole routine part just kind of went out the window, and I was with this couple who had just lost a baby after birth, and it was scary. It was challenging. I mean, I was a chaplain intern, and it was on the weekend. Yeah, Mark.
At this point, have you graduated from Fuller already?
Yeah, I was right at the end there. Yeah.
Okay. Because I'm trying to understand the term education in there.
Yeah, it's a whole separate program, and
pastoral practice is what you were doing.
yeah.
Part of Fuller educational process.
Yeah, some seminary programs have one unit of CPE as a requirement. So a lot of people have to take it, and some of them it clicks with or not. So that was, forget what year that was, 6 years ago or something like that. But it was amazing. It was really challenging, but it just again reaffirmed some of the doors that God had me walk through. And you got to remember, this is all after I retired. And then in 2020, this was a door that kind of came, that hit me by surprise when George Floyd was murdered, May 25th, 2020. I was in a men's small group. I've told this story in the sanctuary several years ago, but I'll just try to make this one short, a short version. I was part of a men's group here, made up of men from this church, that we had been together for, 15 years, meeting weekly. It was an amazing group. After this happened, I was reading, I was really hit hard with it, and I was trying to understand why it personally was hurting so much. And I read this statement that was offered by pastors from black churches across the country when Juneteenth came along the next month. And I shared it with my small group. I said, I'm really struggling with this. And I shared this article with them, and the response I got back was not what I was expecting. It was like, do you really believe this? This is really just a political thing. It's not a theological statement. It just shocked me. And after a little more interchange, the 15-year plus year relationship with that group ended, at least for me. I wasn't seen or heard. I totally understand that people have different views. I mean, we know that especially today, right? It's very obvious. But that doesn't bother me. Having people with different opinions, that's everywhere. But the reaction that I received, someone said, "I can't believe you fell for that." Those were the words. And so I ended my relationship with that group, and I actually haven't been involved with men's ministry since, because it ended up being very traumatic. I've learned to use that word now to describe what had happened. So actually, going back to the invitation from Steve to come here, there was some hesitation. Then I didn't realize that how it was still bothering me. But then God, I didn't put this in the picture, but this was another one of those doors. This invitation to come here, to share. So I decided to step through it. Before I hesitated too long and kept shutting it, right? Steve probably would have kept asking me, but I said, So I really appreciate the invitation, personally. So after all that happened, I really got involved in the racial justice group here at church. So this is all, again, the door of George Floyd's murder. I got involved in the racial justice in the church working group significantly, and we did a lot of work with staff. We were doing like a self-assessment. What's the condition or the health of our condition of our church related to injustice or white supremacy, structures. It was a really good time with staff of learning about who we were as a church and things that we can continue to strive to get better at. And then the presbytery, our presbytery that we're connected to, San Francisco Presbytery, was starting to get involved in a lot of racial justice work. And again, God was, and here I am. So, right, I was on this chaplaincy trajectory. I started the ordination process, started taking my exams, and then this George Floyd thing happened. And I was very challenged by, wait a minute, I need to focus my time on what I'm supposed to be doing. There's a timeline that I'm supposed to be headed toward, ordination. But God kept reminding me that, I need you to follow my rhythm for your life right now. And he kept throwing this stuff up in front of me. And I felt a lot of passion about it, racial justice and equity. So I got heavily involved, or still am, with the presbytery now in terms of racial justice work. We just finished in February. I was on a team at the presbytery where we spent 2 years studying the presbytery and did a racial equity audit of the presbytery. So similar to some of the work we did here at this church, but even more extensive about history of where we've fallen short, how we've maybe, example, treated our Spanish-speaking or black congregations compared to other congregations in our presbytery. They were really kind of sensitive, difficult conversations to have, and actually to put it down on paper and present it to the presbytery. But the presbytery is moving forward to do some of this challenging work, which is great. And now I'm a chair of a presbytery committee called the Committee on Representation, Belonging, and Empowerment, which is part of the steps of paying careful attention and listening to the voices that haven't actually been heard historically, in our presbytery. So, I'm following God's leads, and it's taken me way off the track in terms of what I thought my ordination process would be. But it feels right. And God's saying there is no timeline Everyone's timeline is different. This is mine for you. Though it's still difficult, right? Because you've been on this long process and you want to get it done. So clarity on chaplaincy, more and more, as you can hear in some of these stories, and there's more. There's so much clarity because during since the years I graduated, there was people approaching me about, would you be interested in a parish ministry, at a church? And I've done a couple like short temporary things at some local churches, and I've enjoyed it, but I kept coming back to this care ministry of chaplaincy. So that kept being reaffirmed for me, even to most recently. And then brings us to today. Steve mentioned that I'm going to be off to Hawaii. I decided to do some more CPE, but this time I'm doing what they call a CPE residency, which is a 12-month full-time. Like before I did it was part-time because I was working full-time at EBMUD. This is a 12-month full-time chaplaincy residency, and I'm doing it in Honolulu. Why Honolulu? I have family ties there. And there's some other factors that made this an opportunity that God kind of opened up to me, that they had this kind of program over there. Because there's several CPE programs here in the Bay Area I could have easily applied to, and I did. So I applied to a couple here, a couple in Los Angeles, and this one in Honolulu. What pushed me toward Honolulu was they were the first to respond to me. They interviewed me, and then they told me, well, we'll know in like 3 or 4 months, and we'll let you know. Okay. And I was waiting to get interviewed by these other groups. Well, they called me like the next week after the interview and said, we'd like to have you join us. And that was an indication to me that they really wanted me there. And it was God saying, here's another open door, you need to consider this. There's always challenges with that, right? Moving over there temporarily, etc. And again, this ordination timeline, even though I'm trying to understand that God has a rhythm for myself, it's still a struggle, right? You fight with your human side. It's like, oh gosh, this is going to get prolonged a little bit more. These are the places that I applied to and ended up at Queens Medical Center in Honolulu. Always an intern. I throw my badge up there because I remember talking to my CPE supervisor in San Leandro talking about the word intern. And it dawned on me that, we're interns for our entire life as disciples, right? An intern, definition out of the dictionary, student or trainee who works, sometimes without pay, at a trade or occupation in order to gain work experience. I think that's what God's calling us to most of the time in our lives, to continue to be interns, to learn, to be curious, to explore those gifts, right, that He's given you. And God will do the teaching. So I'm looking forward to this next adventure, discovering what God has in store, right, in this next CPE unit. Come, follow me, and I will show you. In that case, in Matthew's, how to fish for persons. But, just come follow me and I'll show you. So summary, paying attention and listening. I still have to remind myself constantly. Prayer, scripture, life experiences, like this morning. Some of the stuff that I'm sharing with you, I'm realizing right now as I'm standing here, that this particular experience is also another turning point that's defining, about the whole men's ministry and relationship with men's groups. God's definition versus ours. Realistic, practical, attainable. I think for most of us, we continue to learn and realize God defines those words very differently than we do as human beings. Completely differently. I continue to still discover that. And I talk about being in sync with God's rhythm. This is God's wavelength right now for me. It's just an illustration. This is how that's me in red. But over time, if we're paying attention right, it begins to change a little bit. Maybe fall a little closer to the frequency. And then we'll never always be perfect. But if we're striving to get to be something like this, where we might be still a little bit behind, or after God's, and we're discovering what is, but if we can just get a little closer to that rhythm, and you can really sense it inside you physically, the feeling you have where, this feels right. Even though it might not seem right to the world, some world standard, and the times that I felt like this, like going into this residency in Hawaii, it feels like this, even despite the challenges involved, financially and stuff. So that's where I'll leave you. And these are the questions that I have for table talk. In what ways has trying to discern God's calling on your life been a challenge for you? Since God doesn't usually send us a text or email, a letter with his guidance, in what ways do you seek his word for you or the movement of the Holy Spirit in your life? For me, it's that image of this open door. And then, what does the word, there's no real right answer to this. What does the word retirement mean to you? Some of you are retired. Mm-hmm. Some of you are hoping to be retired. And how does your current definition of retirement reflect God's call on you as a disciple? Or how is it impacting how you view God's call on you as a disciple or us as disciples? Because it could be a word that really puts us in weird positions or weird understanding of what God might be wanting for us to do, especially post, daily work, paid employment work decisions. I mean, retirement can mean so many things. I remember when I retired, everyone always asked, so what are you going to do? And if they didn't already know, I told them, well, I went back to school recently. I just graduated, so I'm interested in doing some other kind of work, hopefully in chaplaincy. And they kind of look at you like, oh, okay, or interesting, okay. We were expecting more like go on endless vacations and, whatever, and just relax and kick back. But I haven't found that to be God's message to me. Maybe at some point, maybe when I can't physically do some of this other work, but I find a lot of passion in it, and that's just the affirmation for me to keep moving in this direction and just wanting to learn and be curious and love one another, right? The great command, love one another, and that's all I'm striving to do. So thanks. And I'll join a table for a discussion. Yeah.
Quick question, and something that I'm kind of wrestling with right now, maybe a few of you are as well, with your comment and your little story there about your men's group and then having that falling out. I've got family members that I'm dealing with now, and you know where I'm going with this. I think probably a lot of you might have been marching last week with the No Kings, all these demonstrations that are happening now. And I got family members that are like coming up with comments like the one or two people in your group there, which I find interesting insofar as they're church people. And actually I have a brother that I'll confess that is a church very strong Christian in his mind that feels completely different about what's going on in our leadership. Any hints there? I mean, you just cut them off, right? I mean, how do you do that?
Well,
Relative.
for family, and I think probably a lot of us have that experience, right?
I want to hear about any of the.
Yeah, I have that experience too, and for family, it's so difficult. I think cutting it off won't work in that situation unless I don't know too many people who would find that easy to do. I was just reading an article recently about conversations. It was about a book about having conversations with people that have completely different opposite perspectives from you, and it's really challenging, but spending time in conversations that I have to remind myself to do this rather than either get into an argument or just ending conversation. The challenge was to be curious and to kind of learn more what's making them tick, just to understand, not to argue, well, you're right or I'm right, you're wrong or I'm wrong, but being curious. Now, I like the idea of doing that. I think it actually is a great approach, but to do it in practice, it's got to be so hard. But that was one of the things that I'm trying to wrestle with in relationships like that, because I still, with the men, because the men that I was in this group with, I mean, we haven't spoken in a long time now, but there'll probably be that day when there's an opportunity, right, to have conversation or hopefully some kind of reconciliation or something like that. I'm leaving that to God to provide that open door. Maybe there will be one, but in the time being, I've been focusing on relationships, healthy relationships, because there's plenty of other ones that I can lean into. But yeah, that's a great question. Mark, you had a question?
Besides saying thank you for all the preparation.
It was actually interesting to go through it.
It's great. I really appreciate hearing about your life and your decision. I just wonder if there's anything more you might say about the decision to live with your wife, given that you've been in this area for so long.
Oh yeah.
And of course, there was a big decision back early on, just to stay here. I'm just a little curious, but.
Yeah, no, the biggest one was, I was really interested how it might be, the learning experience would be culturally, with the cultural differences. But the biggest part was family connections there. I have a first cousin there that, he's just a little older than me, but he's been diagnosed with Parkinson's, and it's actually, he's deteriorating faster than we all thought. And so there were opportunities, and I have another friend who's going through cancer treatments over there. So it's actually opened up opportunities to spend time with those two people, and just, my whole dad's family is from the islands. That's where my dad's from. He was the only one who came over here to the mainland. That's how, we ended up here. But the rest of his family's there. Many have passed away recently, but there's still relatives there. So I provided an opportunity, because I know there was family close by, and to connect with them in a more extended way. But it's really interesting. I asked, when I got interviewed for this internship, I said, what's unique about the hospital setting here in Honolulu compared to other places? And I was actually surprised. I didn't think about this, but it made sense. They said that you'll be surprised how many people you're going to be interacting with that are from all over the world, who don't always speak English. And they were saying, because so many people travel there. And she goes, you'd be surprised how many people end up in the hospital for whatever reason, whether it's because of an ongoing, illness condition and something happens while they're on vacation, or, God forbid, there's an accident or something that happens while they're on vacation. the role play in the interview was just that situation. The director of this program is German, and she acted out as a wife who just lost her spouse because of an accident on vacation, and she's in the hospital, and the chaplain comes. She spoke very little English, and so that, I think I'm going to find that it's going to be interesting. I mean, because when you think about the highs, right, of traveling for a holiday or maybe a vacation that you know, maybe this is your one time you're visiting there, and something like that happens. I mean, we know people, right, from our church who's had that situation happen. So it'll be challenging, but it'll be different and a learning experience for me.
I think we should continue in this group format for another 5 or 10 minutes as people have questions. I think this is a really good format. I just want to say, I had no idea of the pain that you went through connected with the men's group. I think we're all having pain with people that we care for, that we're feeling splits with. Some cases, you know, children and parents, just that we seem to be at a time where we're disposing of things. So I just want to thank you for the heartfelt way in which you're approaching this, and the openness that you're holding it open. I just found that beautiful, and the fact that you're openly sharing with us what's going on with you. I just want to thank you so much for being honest and being vulnerable. It
You're
seems
welcome.
like a beautiful part of you, and I can see.
Well, I'll be honest with you, in preparing, you know, Mark was talking about preparation. So many times during preparing for this, I'm not going to talk about that. You know, I'm going to leave that part out. I can tell a lot of this other stuff without touching upon that. But my wife kept telling me, but that's not your story. You know, they want to learn your story. Right, and it's actually a huge part of my story, right? I mean, my wife, of course, she experienced a lot of, firsthand of the trauma. You know, I didn't even use that word to describe what had happened, but as time went on, talking to therapists and things like that, that's the word. And understanding what that means and how prevalent it is in people's lives, whether they're large or small, but trauma, realizing how many people are experiencing that because of either some relationship or some experience, whether it happened, you know, we could be in our 60s and 70s, but it happened when you were 10, it's still affecting you now, right? And you may not realize it to the extent, like for my situation, I didn't realize how, I was deeply hurt when it happened. And I kind of just stayed away from, because people had, over time had asked me, oh, would you like to join our group? Oh, thanks for the invitation, but nah. And this is the first Men's Connect breakfast I've come to since it got restarted, you know, when Michael and the group got it started again. And so again, that invitation that Steve provided was that open door, and like I said, I could have slammed it shut. And again, you know, spending enough time to talk about it in this presentation, I could have avoided it. So it's helping me process it too as well by sharing it. So I appreciate your comments, but you know, it's a great opportunity for me to work through stuff in front of everybody. But you know, that's what ultimately, right? Relationships like these are, men's relationships with other men, it's unique. It's not, it's similar to some other relationships, but there's parts of it that is very unique. And it can be very, very important. I think a lot of men don't ever get to discover that because they don't have the opportunity to do it. So I'm glad all of you guys are here. I know you must be constantly inviting people to come. And I'm still working on my journey with related to men's ministry, but hey, this invitation is a huge step for me. I'm realizing now, you know, looking back just over the last couple of weeks and saying yes to Steve. Anyways, yeah, right.
So Rick, how has this journey you're on now changed your perspective on ordination, which is the typical?
Oh, ordination, my goal is still to become ordained. It's changed my perspective, and I've learned that, the ordination process, especially now that, God had gotten me involved in Presbytery, now significantly in some of this committee work. Ordination is another human process with human standards that you're trying to, attain to get through. But in terms of the time involved to do it, I'm finding I'm slowly and better understanding that God's timeline for all this, I want to keep my line as close to the rhythm that God is on. And I think when I was thinking about the human timeline, this is what you need to do. You should do this in this month, do this in that month, do this by the first year, blah, 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 blah. That was me doing this, and God's line was this smooth curve. And until I started trying to align more with his rhythm versus my human rhythm, that I wanted to get it done. I mean, I felt like that when I was in seminary, right? I went to school for 8 years, and I was trying to force myself to take more classes because I didn't want to go to school that long while I was working. And I tried it 1 quarter. It was just a failure. I mean, it was a struggle. And so I went back to a slower pace, and I felt like my line was more, even though it was very non-traditional in terms of the other students that I was with, like they were starting and finishing, and I was still getting there. But then later when I learned that, I graduated right before I became eligible to retire, it made sense. God's rhythm made sense. It just didn't make sense to what I wanted to do as a human, get it over with, because it was a struggle. I still don't know how it all happened, going to school and I'm working all day and then going to school at night, constantly, including the summers. So I didn't take any summer off because I didn't want to extend it to 12 years. I was able to keep it down to 8 years, which took a long time, but somehow God saw me through it, and it was a positive experience after all that. Yeah, John.
I'd love to hear more about your 1 unit of CPE in terms of whether the supervision that's part of the program and the fellowship with the other interns as part of the program was helpful or not to you. You've said that some of this is personal development and there's not much other to do with it, but were you able to integrate all of that in the CPE?
Yeah, I'm glad you're asking that question because it was actually really significant. The cohort that I was in, the other interns during that time, I'm still in touch with several of them. And another thing that I really resonated with, well, one, the fellowship, support, and encouragement of us as a group of interns. But in chaplaincy, it's very much multi-faith and interfaith work. I am learning to really love working with people from varying faith traditions. It seems so healthy, and it really meets the goal of what chaplaincy is supposed to be. I mean, because the population within a hospital is totally diverse. I remember one experience, I was called down to the ICU because a family was there and they had a family member dying that night. It was going to happen that night. And I came down because I was the one on duty that day or that evening, and after talking with them, you kind of explain who you are personally, like my background. I'm a Protestant Christian chaplain. But I want to know, that's not the important part. The important part is, learning about what that family needs, and they were a Hindu family. And I was racking my brains trying to figure out, the best way, and so asking them questions about what they really needed, and that I could help, either try to find resources or something for what they needed in that moment, because this person was literally like, before that evening was done, was going to pass away, because they had this huge family group that was there around the bed. And they just said, at a time when you're so close to death, they just said, we just want to pray to God. Do it your Christian way, that's totally fine. We just need to be able to, we want our family all together to be praying over the bedside after the long conversation with them. So I said, be happy to, and spending the rest of the evening with them. But it just seemed like I want to think, why couldn't life every day be like this, where you have people with different belief systems and stuff like that? But the important thing was this family needed support, spiritual support, and whoever you are, from whatever tradition you're from, you can be there to help with a little bit of that. So I'll always remember that, and I really love working with colleagues from different faith traditions. It just seems, I don't know, what's the right word? When you're got boots on the ground and you're there in the moment, books and stuff like that, that's all out the window, right? It's human being to human being, relationship, community, and it's a really healthy way for the world to live together, these examples. Anyway.
Could you describe a little bit about when you were called down to the couple who just lost their baby and how?
I was scared to death. I'm an intern. I was covering on a weekend shift. So I was the only one there. There weren't any of the staff chaplains on. You get this call. I've never heard that term before in an official capacity. Fetal demise. And then I went down there. It was such like I said, the whole day changed completely. I was with this couple and their family the rest of the day into the evening. And the sad part was they were still in the labor and delivery unit. So when I was with them in the room, there wasn't another room available for them to move to. So you're hearing crying of newborn babies in the hallway, even with the door closed. And I just wanted to care and shelter this couple from all that was going on. I still can't imagine what it was like for them, or what it would be like to be a person there in a labor delivery with all these families celebrating just right here in the hallway outside your door, new children coming in, and all they wanted was, the first thing they wanted from me was, we want the baby's body back in the room, because the hospital, after the delivery happened, the hospital took the baby's body to the morgue already. So the first hour or two was like wrestling with I was trying to be an advocate for them, wrestling with nurses and stuff like that. I said, the parents really want to have the baby's body, and they want to hold the baby longer. And eventually we were able to make that work. And even though people were saying, well, we don't normally do that. Well, you're going to do it today. You're talking like that as an intern. And I learned a lot about, the wide variety of things a chaplain might do for a family. And then, they were a Catholic family. We couldn't find a priest that was available. So I spent the time with them, and they said they wanted to do something in the room, kind of like a dedication, filled up this hospital room and labor and delivery with all these extended family members. So we did a little small, dedication service in that room. But I'll never forget it. I was just probably scared to death the whole time because I hadn't done. I mean, how often would you have done this before?
But where do you find the strength? How can you do it without crying?
But you don't. Sometimes you cry, crying with the family. But all the times where I stepped out of the room to check on resources and stuff like that, I prayed a lot. God, I know you're well aware that this is totally new ground for me. Maybe every human being, doesn't go through something like this. I just don't want to get in the way. I want them to be able to see your love in some tangible way in this difficult time. As simple as that, right? And not to make it too complicated or something has to be just perfect. And just a lot of asking questions and listening. Like what they were feeling, what they were wanting at that time. A lot of just how they were feeling. Hugs, nodding of your head, and intently really listening to what they were struggling with. I mean, this was a young couple, right? They were in their early 20s. This is their first child.